Thank you for joining NadineBentRussell.net. Launching my first podcast after taking quite a hiatus, a sabbatical, however you want to look at it. I have some really great people joining me tonight for this discussion of white savior, racism in the American church. And it's not just going to be about the dynamic of white savior, that white savior dynamics. It's really going to be a conversation about the breadth and the depth of what that has given our society, and how it's impacted the dynamics between us in all these different ways. So I have a couple of what I would call special guests with me tonight, besides the people who are here on the broadcast, and they'll be participating as they want to and they feel led to. But I've specifically built this around a conversation with David Daniels, who's there. David, you want to quickly just say hi?
Hi there.
and and Dreama, how do I pronounce your last? Dreama, um,
Deirdre.
Deirdre, how do I pronounce your last name?
Garrett.
One more time for me.
Garrett.
Garrett. Deirdre Garrett. They'll introduce themselves, and I'm actually going to turn it over to them to do that. But you'll understand why they're part of the conversation. And anybody else who wants to introduce themselves can. But Deirdre, could you start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Deirdre Garrett. I am the operations director for Be the Change Youth Initiative. It is a nonprofit that was actually started by my oldest daughter a few years ago. It originally started as a ministry that was about empowering youth between the ages of 5 and 17 to use their gifts to help other children around the world. And we've done a lot of work with a lot of organizations, including Make-A-Wish Foundation. But we went on the road in 2019, and our two oldest, did a show. And in that show, my son, who is 16, shared about his struggles with depression and suicidal ideation. And our family, because of that moment, ended up staying on the road for all of 2019. So about 11 months in an RV across the country. And we started talking to people about mental health. But what happened was we started looking at the contributing factors, especially socioeconomic factors to mental health across the board, not just with teenagers. And we started having some really hard, honest, vulnerable conversations about pretty much everything they tell you not to talk about in the church, including racism, politics, pretty much everything. And so what we found was that people genuinely wanted to talk about them, but they were afraid to say the wrong thing. They were afraid to be condemned for maybe, misrepresenting their thoughts. And so it just, that was before 2020, that was before this last year and everything that has happened. So we're actually getting ready to relaunch Be the Change Youth Initiative with an emphasis between ages of 15 and 25.
Oh, that's great.
About how to essentially raise a generation of peacemakers. How can we introduce civil discourse? How can we learn to listen to people's stories, to ask and be active listeners, and then take action, whether that's internally processing and having a perspective shift, or actually taking action in the form of advocacy from what we've learned.
That's great. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you so much. And David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I find this a very interesting conversation to have tonight. For two reasons. One reason is I'm a kid who was raised in the church. I went to church when I was 6 and went for a number of years, and haven't been in a number of years, and we'll talk about that later. And one of the things I started to understand is that church really wasn't safe for me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, and safety has become really what drives me from day to day. So I'm a health, safety, and environmental professional who spent about 30 years of my life in the fire, rescue, and emergency services. And now I spend my time trying to help people be safe in the spaces that they're in. When we get into the conversation, we'll find out that a lot of places that advertise themselves to be safe spaces to come and be yourself, they really aren't.
Right.
And they aren't because the people who set them up don't even know what safety is. They know what, tradition is, they know what history is, but they don't really know how to make it safe and make it safe for everyone. And I'm also just recently become a part of an organization called The Bridge. It was started about 3 years ago. A black guy and a white guy met at an event who didn't even necessarily know each other, and started having some conversations about race. That became, again, men getting together talking about race, and then women coming together also talking about race. And we're still having that conversation. And we are now at the point where we want to start sharing some of it with the rest of the world. So that's it. There's more to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Dreama and Karen, would you like to introduce yourself? Antoinette, I saw that you joined. Jeffrey, any of you guys want to introduce yourselves? Just unmute and start talking. Karen, you're unmuted.
Just real quickly.
Hmm.
So, born and raised in Baltimore, and I've
Yes.
kind of traveled around the country um, and seen a little bit different of the way that people live around this country and some of the different views. I am now landed in Wisconsin, which is very white. I've been here for quite some time, and I'm really just trying to, I think at this point, learn and to be the I'm trying to avoid all the catchphrases because who wants to get into that? But to be the ally that I need to be.
Hmm.
Um, I think I've had blinders on for a very long time,
Hmm.
and those are coming off.
Hmm.
And I want to be able to help others that are in my place to have those blinders come off
Yes,
as well. So
that's
I'm
great.
here mostly, I hope, to learn.
Yes, that's great. That's great, Karen. Thanks for coming on. Dreama, would you like to introduce
Oh,
yourself?
sure. So I'm Dreama. I currently live in a small town, Oconee County, South Carolina, right next to Clemson. But I'm originally from New York. I don't sound much like a Yankee anymore. I moved here quite young. um, and so I'm here kind of like Karen to learn. I share it with Nadine, a lot of church hurt. And so for many, many years, my relationship with God it was very untraditional. It wasn't, hey, be in church. And then a lot that's been going on in this country, especially this year that was brought to light, it's been going on for a long time. And it seemed like all of a sudden, a lot of people around me wanted me to speak for everyone that looked like me. And it started to make me angry and hurt, and people who I had very dear relationships with, I just shut down and I didn't really, I'm like, I didn't want to be the voice, so, and it was kind of hard for me because of also my Christian relationship and then just being a Black woman. So I'm here today. I had a friend that kind of connected me with Nadine online,
Yeah.
and I've been slowly starting to participate a little bit. So I'm here to learn.
Yeah, that's great, Dreama. Thanks for joining. So, Randy, thanks for
Hi,
joining.
Nadine. You're
Hi.
welcome.
Can Let me just take a pause for the cause for a second here because um, Randy Parent, who just joined, is one of my high school teachers. And we have maintained contact, or thank God for the special this special social media. And he's actually the one that invited me to the bridge. And he was my chorus teacher. He heard my burgeoning singing voice at a very young age, but he was also an amazing band director for our award-winning band at James Logan High School. So Randy, do you want to say anything about joining the conversation and being with us? And thank you so much for joining.
Um, I'm very fond of Nadine, so that's the biggest reason that I signed on today was to have a chance to hang out with her a little bit. And I watched the movie this morning, and I found it very intriguing,
Yeah.
and I thought it would be an interesting conversation. So it, I got a lot. Think there's a lot to talk about there, but between the topic and the hostess, I decided that I would join in.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for joining in. So my friends that are not on video, do you want to introduce yourself? Just come off mute and say anything that you want to say, or you can continue to lurk. Don't feel obligated. Yeah. Okay, great. So initial impressions of this movie, what did you think, like when you got to see it for the first time? Your just an overall view. What did you think? Anybody? It's popcorn around here, so you know.
I thought, ooh, somebody finally said it.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Great. Karen.
It was hard to get an overall because my husband and I watched it together,
Right.
and just about every single point we stopped and talked, and I finally said, okay, we need to get back on track or we're going to be here for 3 hours trying to watch this. But there were a couple things that really jumped out at me, and this was after reading the book White Too Long.
Right.
So there
Okay.
was a fair amount of it that was a repeat, but um, the maternal mortality rate, oh my gosh, that hit me. And and we'll probably get into some of this, so I won't
Yes.
elaborate, but
Okay.
that was the one thing that I walked away from and was,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. No kidding. Deirdre?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly humbled by how the Lord reveals how ignorant I remain to be, even though I intentionally read and educate myself and take classes. And I'm still, even though I know that the history that I was taught growing up was not a true, balanced, holistic picture of American history, I still, every time I learn something new, I'm like, gosh, why didn't I learn that? Why wasn't I taught that? And I grew up in the South, spent most of my life though in the North, but in the South, I was never taught the Civil War. I was taught the Northern aggression. And so like even just things like that, where yeah, I'm just constantly humbled at how ignorant I am.
Yeah.
But I'm trying. So
Yeah. Well, and in the group, when I have these discussions, one of the things I always like to frame, because framing is really important, that your worldview is valid. So you're not really ignorant, because all of us are ignorant of something and we can beat
Right.
ourselves up for what we don't know.
Right.
But actually, I approach this conversation affirming who you are, who you've been, and your life journey. So I don't treat people like they're ignorant. I treat every single person that comes to this conversation like they have something to contribute, because every single person's life journey is valid. So I understand that one of the reasons I'm even doing this kind of work is because I provide a space that a lot of people don't have, especially around the conversation of race. I provide a space where people can be quote unquote wrong, or say the most quote unquote egregious things, because I want people to be able to express themselves so they can build the muscle in expressing themselves around this topic and a lot of other difficult topics. So understand, everybody that's listening, that that's the approach to the conversation. So no one should, treat you like any kind of way because of how you express yourself in this conversation, because we all have a valid worldview. So your worldview is going to color this conversation in such a powerful way, because a lot of people don't know that side of the story and it's vilified, you know and there's parts of it to vilify and there's parts of it to appreciate. So we got to get to another more nuanced and more sophisticated approach, because vilifying each other, I tell people all the time about this work, if I was going to be offended or boycott every single thing I'm consciously aware is offensive, I'd have to stop breathing and walk around naked. And so we all have to choose what we want to do with our life and how we're going to contribute to the dismantling of this while we ride the coach. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's how I'm approaching it. David?
Nadine, can and I want to add, and I try to speak up about things as soon as I hear them.
Hmm.
And I find it interesting how, so another one of these myths that we have in the United States is that somehow it was so bad in the South and so much better in the North on all these topics.
Hmm.
And I was raised in Seattle, Washington, and they didn't tell me about the Civil War either.
Oh,
And
wow.
or they made it seem like, oh, those folks down in the South, they treat those Black people so bad down there,
Right.
when folks in Seattle were treating me just as bad or worse. So
Mm.
it's not, no one in the country should either feel, celebrated or feel persecuted, because just kind of is what it is. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's some positives to it, but it's not better or worse
Right.
anywhere. It's really
Right.
the same everywhere.
Right. And kind of trying to find somebody to drag all the time. There's this way that we interact with each other. Like we don't feel power in our own lives. So we want to eke out power in the life of other people. And all you have to do is drive, because that's exactly where it shows up the most in our society, is how people act when they're on the road anonymous in their car, being a jerk, you know? And that same person may not even be a jerk in real life, but let them get behind that wheel. It's a whole, you're experiencing a whole different person. So yes, David, and the other part that plays a role in this is part of the reason that we weren't taught a lot of the same things, because we were all taught the same things, right? We were all taught the same things, but we have different life experiences of the same information. So one of the reasons is there's this very basic human condition called pride. And as a result of pride, we don't walk around going, okay, y'all, I failed at this. You should know I failed at this. I got this really great lesson out of it, because one of my favorite sayings is, I don't lose, I win, or I learn. And so, and Randy, you know something about that about me, because I was also a track runner, in high school. So I had a certain competitive tenacity. But as a human being, we don't go in, I tell people, and some people have seen the interview that I did with my friend Kevin. The long story short is, how are people going to learn how to clean the laundry if the laundry's not put out there and they don't see it go from dirty to clean and the process that it takes? We teach people how to do laundry, but we don't teach them how to do their emotional laundry and how to do that work with other people. And that's part of what this work is about as well. So this movie, really, I was expecting it to be about the paternalistic way that white people swoop in and want to lead everything, that white savior idea that's going on around the conversation of race these days. But they did an even better job in an hour of hitting all these different topics. And I understand, Karen, why you all stopped and discussed each kind of chapter. And I'm glad that they kind of described each section like a chapter, because it gives you bite-sized pieces, so to speak. But anything more, because I just want to kind of recap, we all were taught that similar things. David was talking about how, the fact that for him, there's a saying that I was taught, as a young activist: as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you're south. So it kind of, fits in with what your experience has been, David. And I look forward to you talking more about that. And then the other stuff about, worldview. Our worldviews are valid, so we want to approach our experiences like our worldviews are valid. So let's dive in. Anybody want to start about this? I have lots of notes, and I always come to these conversations with lots of notes, but I'm more interested in the people, and I don't have an agenda about this. So anyone?
Yeah, one thing that
Yes.
I found the whole thing interesting,
Yes.
but the one thing that sticks out, it was the discussion about the evolution of the black church coming out of the white church.
Mm-hmm.
The black people coming out of the balcony, the gentleman that led the black members out, and they started the black church, and the difference between the black church and the white church,
Mm-hmm.
and what they're celebrating,
Right.
and the fact that the white church isn't really, it's the German church, or the Catholics, the Roman church. It made me contemplate, why are black folks still hanging out in the same religion that was imposed on them?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it was, yeah, because it's your worldview.
Say
So
that again, David.
it's a worldview thing.
Right. Okay.
It's I heard once that for those who follow, sci-fi and all that type of thing, that those of us who are three-dimensional beings can't see the fourth dimension, and so on and so on, because it's just our worldview. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's if you're born into something and your parents take you there. So one of the conversations, matter of fact, we had recently with the bridge is we asked, and this was our men's group, we asked them, so what conversations did, or what conversations did your parents have with you about race? And white parents had different conversations with their kids about race because they experienced race in a different way. They just did. And for each of them, it was valid, it was normal, it's just, that's my reality. until somebody brings me something else.
Yeah.
So again, I went to church because my mom said I had to go, until I got to the point where I didn't want to go. I mean, I didn't have a choice. That's what she did, so I did it with her. So it's so why do people go? It's because they, in some cases, they were forced to go. Back back on the plantation days, it was the only place that Black people could go and not and be in control. Uh, Particularly the men, that was their opportunity to be in control. Also, I had opportunity to go to Selma and do the walk across the Pettus Bridge, back in the day. One of the things they said is that one of the Jim Crow laws was the church was the only place Black people could go where all the Jim Crow laws didn't apply. So when you went to the church, you could be free and you could speak. You could actually assemble with more than 3 people without a permit. That was the only place you could do it, was in the church. So again, there have been very valid reasons why Black people have clung to the church, because it's, if you're coming up and you can spell and write, you're going to be a preacher. Nobody assumes you're going to be anything else. So it's just baked into the cake.
Any more feedback on that point that Randy brought up? I have some, but I always wait for other people. Deirdre?
I was going to say it's very interesting because when we traveled the country, we were on the road for almost a year, and with very few exceptions, we were at a different church every Sunday across the theological spectrum. And like but it was mind-boggling to me how much a lack of the racial diversity in our churches that we saw. And obviously, it wasn't an actual, probably a true representation. And we actually, when we lived in Nashville, we went to a multicultural, multiracial church. And it was, my kids loved that church more than anything. And it was the only time where the service was like over 2 hours and my kids never complained. But like it was just really jarring for my children to, after that experience, which was so vibrant and so great, to go to churches that missed a lot of it. We went to churches that were very high liturgy, and very subdued, and the whole gamut. But across the board, there was, we refer to it as self-segregation. Like they were choosing, it seemed like, to do church their own way. And not just when we talk about Black and white, like, there are churches for all different types. Like, it's a Korean church that we went to, like it was, when we talked to people about it, they just said, we want to go someplace where we're comfortable, where there are people like us. And that really, for us, started to like show us something so much more deeper than, the way someone's skin looks. There were cultural divides, that we were seeing, but we're like, how do we bridge those divides? How do we get to a place where we can worship together? Because in heaven, we're going to be. So like, what does that look like here? And I just remember staying up many times late at night being like, how do we get past this, whatever this is?
That's great. That's really great. Anyone else want to jump in on this question before I have my say on it? Okay, so David, your point of view is the feedback I've heard from a lot of my Black friends about the safety zone, and the place of affirmation that the Black church continues to be to this day, right now, and Deirdre, that multicultural and then self-segregation that you experienced when you traveled across the country is also true. They say that it's the most segregated hour of the week, right? And the other part of it too is that, and I try, there's this Netflix series called Black AF, and if you're sensitive to cursing, don't watch it, because literally the children curse in this show. And but every title of that show is because of slavery. No, I'm not kidding. Because of slavery. Like however many episodes they had in their first season, they all had that kind of a title. We had to go on vacation. Yes, because of slavery. Like it was like that, right? But at the same time, we do need to understand about racism, that it's baked into every single aspect of our society. And a lot of people, like, if people tell me that they don't believe that or whatever, it just tells me that we have a completely they're over there worldview and I'm over here worldview. But that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation. And so if they don't experience racism, then it's even harder, because then I have to prove my life experience, right? But the Black church still stands because it's a place of safety. Randy, yes, Africans were taught Christianity or hi Antoinette, Africans were taught Christianity and organized themselves around Christianity because that's all they really knew, because the process of seasoning, the brutal terroristic process of seasoning, was effective. And there are people that are trying, and I've seen a wide spectrum of people that are trying to either regain like a indigenous practice and indigenous practices from Africa, and a lot of people, my brothers and sisters that we call hoteps, they're doing like the ancient Egyptian Kemetic practices. There's large churches of people that are doing that. Some people are stepping out of Christianity into Islam. Some are stepping out of Christianity into atheism. Some are stepping out of Christianity into all kinds of things. And that is really what makes the African American community not a monolith, because the church is what teaches values. Your spiritual practices are what teaches your values. So I don't have any problem with people who don't practice a religion that I practice, because I think that that's also valid. I think that our spiritual expressions towards God, so to speak, in my language, it's all valid, because my only question for anybody that I counsel is it working for you? So like when I come across Black people, that are Christians still, I don't have like this, why are you still a Christian? Blah, like I don't have one iota of what works for me must work for you. And nonetheless, like say somebody's crossing my path, what they cross my path and get from me is who Nadine is, not who Nadine thinks they should be, just who Nadine is. And so then they have maybe another perspective about the world that they could select, different pieces and parts that I may inspire in them. Or they might go, she's whack. And, because everyone's a villain in someone's story, right? So I think that Black people as a whole are still in the Black church, just, a long answer to a short question, but because we're accustomed to it, you know, we are all made to go to church or not. And this generation is the first generation I've noticed that is fully like, you can't assume that when you talk to a Black person, they know anything about the church. And I'm actually glad about that, because I want people to live an examined life, not an unexamined life. And wherever that examination takes them, I think is honorable, as long as they're doing it in good faith and not trying to exploit another person. So thank you, Randy, about that question. Did you have a follow-up or anything that you wanted to add about that, Randy?
Just some of my experience. I'm
It's
not
weird to
afraid.
call you Randy. Let's just start with that. Okay.
You're doing good if you can pull that off.
Oh my
Most
God.
most of my
Mr.
former
Parent.
well, so I had this band booster president named Tony Nahara,
Yeah.
and he
Awesome.
insisted
hmm
that all the other parents call me Mr. Parent.
Yeah.
So all these people that were 15, 20 years older than me,
I know the
they're all,
Naharas. Yep.
I was Mr.
Yes.
To everybody. And many of your peers have never been able to shake it. They cannot call me Randy.
I'm having a hard time. I'm just keeping it together right now. So,
I mean, I'll tell you, so as a musician, I've been in lots of churches. And more often than not, I'm in church because of the music, not that's what brought me there.
yeah.
And but I had my own kind of epiphany in all this. My wife's Catholic. I grew up with a strong anti-Catholic bias that I knew what happened during the Inquisition. I knew what, essentially the Catholic Church was sending around the world with Christopher Columbus and what the missionaries did in California to the indigenous people and stuff. And so I was had a big anti-Catholic bias, yet I got married in the Mission Church of San Rafael to my wife. And I've managed to, over the years, become comfortable going to mass occasionally and being okay in the space, but that took me a while.
hmm
So but now that I got in the video about how the explain to me why the black church is different than the white church. It's more of looking to, I forget how they describe it, but the celebratory nature and the enthusiasm and speaking out and all that. But that appeals to me. I got to go find a black church to go
Yeah,
to.
the liberation aspect of it, the personal liberation aspect of it is definitely the core of what the black church is. Yeah. So
And
definitely.
I love gospel music.
Yes, I know you do. And
What
and go ahead.
what year were you in the choir?
Uh 80 to 84. I'm not ashamed to say I'm 54, but yeah, 80 to
Eight,
84.
80, 84. Okay.
Yeah.
Try to figure it.
And
Were
he,
you were you
he's going over
were you
some
in with
catalogs right now.
were you in with Gary Ferguson?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I was there at that
Okay.
time.
The,
Yeah.
the year we sang operator.
Yes. 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 Yeah.
So that was funny. The first year I got to Logan before you got there,
Yeah.
the choir couldn't sing.
Oh, wow.
You know,
You couldn't
I
tell
said,
when we
okay,
got there.
20 kids and they couldn't, they literally didn't sing. I said, okay, let's sing this. They didn't sing. And
Wow.
so remember Jocelyn Richards?
Yes.
So Jocelyn, a couple other black girls came in and asked me if they sang at church.
Yes. Yes.
And they asked if they could come and use the band room after school to
Yeah.
practice. They wanted to sing something. I said, absolutely. Come on in. And I went out. That's one of the things that the choir you got into that was pretty good.
Yeah.
One of the pieces was I went and found the black kids that sang in church
Yes.
and got them to come be in my choir.
Yes. That's right. Smart man. Smart
Yeah,
move.
so has every other producer of virtually every form of popular music in this country.
Exactly.
That's where most black
Exactly.
artists is where they started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston, number one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Antoinette, did you want to add something? I saw you popped on.
Well, you talk about worldviews and what we're taught.
Hmm.
My experience with you has been world changing
Oh,
because
wow.
I was born and raised in the South, but you have shown me bigotry. You have shown me so many things that I haven't experienced. One of the other speakers was talking about the different conversations that a white family has versus a black family. I wasn't raised seeing color. I was raised looking at a person's character. And I've surrounded myself with people like that. And it's been really heartbreaking to see what you're describing because I've been in the South all my life and I haven't seen it.
Right.
To see it in movies and just wave it off, but when your eyes are open, you can't wave it off anymore because it's not a movie. It's
unsee it.
what people are living right now.
Right. Yeah.
I want to know, now that my eyes are open, what can I do?
Oh, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about
Oh,
that.
I know. I'm jumping ahead.
I know. And that's cool. I love how you connect the dots and jump ahead, but we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on that right before we close out. Like, we're going to spend some time on that conversation. But I want to say you underscored something that's really important. There's two things I want to say about what you said that inspired something. One, racism is not just hatred. Okay. It might have been born out of a place of hatred, but I think it was really born out of a place of greed. Okay. And I'll talk more about what that is. But racism is not day in and day out expressed as actual hatred. So many people focus on groups like the Klan and the Aryan Nation and all the Proud Boys, right up to today. Though so many people focus on those people. That's not the majority of people that are perpetuating racism. All of us are, because we were all taught the same constructs. Those of us who started to question, our what we've been taught, our worldview, that stuff that was just right there in our Cheerios or our porridge or our toast or whatever we had for breakfast, right? That we have blinders on because it's so familiar. Everyone around us reflects the same thing. It's just easy to go into that worldview and live out that worldview until something comes to interrupt it. And oftentimes what comes to interrupt it is something that's life changing and horrible, and that. And I hope to create a space where it doesn't have to be life changing and horrible, that it's already been horrible because we all watched George Floyd die. Okay. And whatever other things that we brought to this conversation about race and what lived experiences are of that. But so it's that hatred piece, right? And the other piece, and here's the big secret that no one talks about, it's meant to be hidden. It's supposed to be a hidden hand that is
That's why it works.
operating highly effectively in the community.
That's why it
Because
works.
so I'm experiencing it, and then you have frames of reference for this reality. Okay. If you know anybody who's been abused, their abuser could be in the room with them and just look at them in a particular way and they get terrified.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you plant terror in a person, and I'm not going to go off the deep end and talk about DNA and how all these things get perpetuated over generations, because there's that as well. And there's psychologists that are doing this work. I have resources about that, and most of you know me pretty well. I don't just say stuff. I have information. Antoinette, she's my number one closest friend in Georgia. um, she knows that if she asks me a question, I'm like shooting her sources. It's not just some anecdotes. So it's meant to be invisible, and it's not about hatred. It's about greed. So David, you wanted to say something while I was speaking?
So it is a system that is working exactly the way it was intended to work.
Yes.
Every system is perfectly constructed to produce whatever it's producing at the time. That's
Right.
it.
Mhm.
It was set up, and interestingly, it wasn't even intentionally set up this way because the folks who set it up weren't as intellectual as as some of us are.
Mm.
Because had they been more intellectual, they'd have figured out how much better our economy would be, how much more effective we'd be as a people, how much safer we would feel if we included everybody. So I think greed is a part of it, but I don't think that there is any particular. There's all kinds of reasons for it.
Well,
It is what it is, and this is just what it's been. And kind of gets to Antoinette's discussion earlier. The question is what we want it to be next, but all of this stuff kind of is what it is. I mean, and people who got into a variety of reasons, and a variety of things drove them, but it all still is what it's been.
remember the book that I shared with you when we first met was Neely Fuller's book about racism and the systemic nature of racism and how it touches every area of human activity. So it's really important. I live in the what's next of it.
Mhm.
Most people don't live in the what's
Yeah.
next of it, but I live in the what's next of it. But
Mhm.
I honor the fact that there are people who need to be brought along to, through their distinctions into the what's next of it, so they can be in the what's next of it in a healthy manner, not in
Absolutely.
a manner where we're
Yeah.
re-injuring each other,
Right.
re-traumatizing each other, and dishonoring each other.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
one of the questions that people got mad at me for asking some months ago was, what does racism cost white people? And I had black people that were on my phone, on my computer, on every single communication. It's like, it don't cost them nothing. They benefit from racism.
Yeah.
But the thing is that racism costs us all our humanity. And so when we live in a system that discounts our humanity for what we can produce from day in and day out, and some of us it looks different. Like for women, we have to smile when we're producing. For men, you have to be macho and unemotional when you're producing. And that's just two different ways that we're a step away from our humanity. And each of us can have a whole conversation about ways that, especially until we get older, we don't honor our humanity. We're just trying to chase the bag, chase success, whichever way it's been defined for us. Right.
Mhm.
So I'm happy to be in the what's next, and we're going to have some time and some conversation around what's next. But we're going to walk through these places because none of us can leapfrog it. Not one of us. There's I facilitate these conversations and been doing it for 30 years, and I don't leapfrog anything. I am so in tune to like what's going on with my heart from one moment to the next. And that's the only, and I want people to understand that is the only thing you can contribute to another human being, is the truth of what's going on in your heart from one moment to the next. But we are so far from that as a society. But I know that we're coming to a place where we're going to be whole. We're going to be wanting human beings to be whole and not just one aspect of who they are. You know, there's things I know about Randy. Weird. Okay, there's things I know about Randy, like he loves the Cal Bears. I'm not going to say anything like personal or confidential because I don't think I know anything like that, because teachers are really good. I'm friends with like 3 of my teachers from high school because we had amazing teachers at James Logan High School, but I'm friends with 3 of them. And, you know, one I can't even, I call Mr. Dugan. I can't even call him Richard, and I can only call you Randy because I'm forcing myself in this moment. Because usually, as you know, when I communicate with you, I can't even go there. And then
Yeah.
and then Lynn Nichols, and she's always
Yeah.
been that Lynn woman. So, but the thing is that it's really important for us to understand that when you're approaching people, you need to know that your worldview is what's operating. And when you're speaking your truth to someone, it's really your truth based on your life journey and your lived experience. And no one has to really be canceled, you know, as a result of the worldview difference. Okay. No one has to be canceled, because the fact is that I can say, like, those of you who've been lurking in the group and, you know, you're not in the day-to-day conversation with me, right? Um, you're you're getting something out of learning the information that's just there, and then the comments that you're reading and the resources that are there. And that's taking you further than you were when you started. And then there'll be a place where you jump into the conversation like you did tonight, Karen, where you're like here with us talking and engaging over the stuff that you've been reading. So this is exactly what this conversation, you know, looks like day in and day out. And we're going to keep going. I see that you logged in, Becky. You want to say anything just to be in the conversation? Becky is one of my friends who's been in the book discussions with me since June, and her life has been ridiculously transformed, but I'll let her talk about that if she's around to do that. She's just coming in from work, I'm sure, so she may not chime in at this point, but she'll chime in. Oh, there you go. Go, Becky.
I'm in the car right now and I'm driving home, so I
Okay.
want to pay attention to that. But
Yep.
it has been transformational for me, and I'm so grateful for learning more and just everything. It makes me want to cry, actually, not just because seeing where I've been and where I am now and all the things that I didn't see and didn't know before, that it it's overwhelming, but it's so necessary. So necessary.
Thanks so much, Becky. And when you get settled, I know you'll join us in a safe manner. So thanks for chiming in while you're on the road.
Nadine, if
Oh, David.
might I suggest that so I heard you say earlier that, you know, we are white people are losing out, you know, because they're losing out on their humanity, and that there's some really objective financial cost to systems of racism as well, though. I mean, I
Yes.
have to be honest.
Oh,
And
no, no. Never apologize for that.
So an example is the city I live in right now it is the largest predominantly Black city ever created from scratch in the history of the country.
Sure.
And it suffers financially from the lack of investment in a lot of its infrastructure. Well, there are a lot of places in the United States where local communities are suffering because of decades of underinvestment. And the underinvestment was because there were Black people or Native Indigenous people or Asian people. So then when the white people come back, they decide they're going to have to spend more to fix something that they could have fixed generations ago. If because our schools are failing today, because we didn't focus on making the schools good for everybody. We didn't do like they did in Finland
Right.
and just have good schools every. So again, there is a financial cost because not everybody's into the touchy feely. I am, but not everybody's into that. So I try to convince them. This is the same conversation we have about safety in general. So you may not even like those people, but do you like you? Do you
Right.
care about you enough
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
treat that other human in such a way that you'd want to be treated, because it's going to come back around to you anyway.
And I'm so glad that you make that connection, because that's another connection that needs to be made, because we are dual, you know, we're a physical person having a spiritual experience. So the very physical aspect of that is money, and how it hits the pocket, and it hits the pocket across municipalities across this country, you know,
Mhm.
just policing enough. We've seen those, you know, those statistics about policing and how much bad policing costs police forces and police
That's right.
departments. I
Right.
want to touch on two things that I didn't touch on when they came up. It's funny, Randy, because most of the atheists I know are ex-Catholics. And I think it's because of the nature of Catholicism being like it was the ruling, like it was like the Romans, you know, at the time, like they were the ruling class, and they connected spirituality to some some value that a person has, and all the different ways that, you know, the Borgias and all those other parts of the, you know, the Catholic Church's history, and, you know, the organized crime that they were connected to for so many years, and the corruption. But and so a lot, I can imagine, and I'm seeing it in the Christian church in America too, where people are turned off by the celebrity preachers and the da 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 da, but they choose to, because of the nature of the American white evangelical conversation is a personal relationship with God. So then they don't necessarily lose God, they just lose the fellowship. So, you know, that's kind of how that goes for people who step away from the church in the US, versus when it's Catholicism, it's like, well, I have nothing then, you know, and so it's then agnostic or atheism that, you know, it's like, I'm not sure, you know, and that's, and I feel like when people are thwarted spiritually, you know, that's a very deep chasm for a lot of people, because I think that we are spiritual beings. How we express that is up to the person, and it's a personal journey. But like not having that touch point for people, and musicians always have it, because music is a spiritual work. I don't care what anybody says about it. But that, and then I want to say, David, there's actually a lot of history. I actually did my thesis in at UC Davis in political science public service about Black settlements in the state of California, and Weed, California is one of the earliest Black settlements of cities in and one of the reasons we don't know about a lot of these places, because they were wiped off the map and literally burned to the ground, you know. So and then there has been a lot of Black cities, because just like there's the Black church that still exists, and I think it's just because people go, well, we can't burn down their churches, although some people have. Um, the Black church still exists to the way that it does is the way that is only because of that. Otherwise, they would go the way of the cities. You know, the cities would be burned to the ground, never to be heard of again. This like ghost of a story that's only on the lips of the griots of the Black community that exists in America today. But I just wanted to touch on those two things. So
Can I
anybody
add
have go,
something?
Deidre?
Yeah, well,
Deidre?
I want to touch on what David said too.
Hmm.
We kind of had a culture shock when we moved to Chattanooga. We were from Maine, so we did live in southern Maine. So it was a sanctuary city, so there
Hmm.
were refugee settlements there. My husband is from northern Maine, which is literally like 99.9% white.
Yes.
And so when we moved to Chattanooga, when we lived in the city, in an apartment in the city, it was a huge wake up call for us when we went to go enroll our children in the public school system.
Hmm.
Because we knew that it would, like, our neighborhood is there, tons of white kids in our neighborhood, but when we went to the school system, and I mean, this was literally our experience. We went to the middle school, my husband and I, we went into the office and said we were there to enroll our daughter, and everyone in the office looked at us and like, here? And we were like, yeah, yes, like, is that not okay? And they had a counselor come and talk to us in the set, and they were so nice. And they said, we just want you to know, like, if you can totally enroll your daughter here, but she will be one of 8 white kids in a school of 350. And we were just like, okay, you know, and then we like started to dig and like do some research about the school system in Chattanooga, and how when segregation, what the cities were becoming desegregated, how a lot of the white families create, that's when a lot of the Christian schools and the Catholic schools were created. And how like we went, because everyone said you have to send your kids to this school. We went to that school, and our kids were like, there's no way we're going to school here. And you know, it was just it was an interesting, like, the dichotomy was breathtaking. And then when you hear the history of how these schools started, and how they were started by Christians. And so like you go back to what David was saying, and you're like, there's so much, if we could just take the time to look into the history of these institutions, and like talk about systemic racism. I mean, even like in the conversation and in the video, the movie, there's so many trigger words, you know, especially, I mean, I went to seminary at probably the whitest, most conservative seminary
Yes, you did.
in the country.
Yes, you did.
And like women can't even take pastoral classes, you know. And it is so interesting when in the very first chapter in the documentary, when it said, look at your seminaries, look at your colleges, like your Bible colleges,
Here's those great dudes on the wall.
They're
Yeah.
all white, old white men. Like they're
Yes.
all old white men. And the most
Or like Randy said, German. you know.
Yes. And the most challenging thing for me that was life transformational, probably 5 years ago, someone very boldly and pointed to me, said, who of color are you sitting under? Like, who is speaking into your life? And I was like, no one. And so like that was a conscious decision to say, that needs to change. Like, I can't change my worldview if I don't have people pouring into me and educating me and teaching me of where my blinders are. So like all that to say, like, it is like just to have some context of institutions in your neighborhoods, in your communities, is really, really eye-opening.
So
Yeah,
like to do a little
absolutely.
preview of Antoinette's question, like, what can I do, right? Given that racism exists, and this is my challenge to anybody watching this, even after this, after this recording, like, look in your day-to-day life, like in your regular life, in everything that you're already doing, and see if you see where racism is showing itself there, expressing itself there, have a hiding place there. And then talk to somebody like myself or someone else that you respect about this conversation, and see, like, really do like a case study, like okay, not a true case study, like that's ridiculous, but like really look at and assess for yourself, what steps can you take to make a difference in it. Like, you're an amazing reflexologist. Shout out to Antoinette's business for full body reflexology, okay? Because I'm just telling you, I've been getting massages my entire life, and reflexology is a whole different level. But you could affect, and this is one thing that a lot of people have been doing, is affecting representation, having more Black full body reflexologists, or Native American, reflexologists, although they could probably teach some things, you know. And what kind of Randy said, I just want to touch on it, is how Christianity kind of basically wiped out the indigenous population, to the point that most Americans don't think Native Americans exist, that they actually don't exist, which I'm like, what? But that, my worldview is different than the average person's worldview. So I can understand. Randy, did you want to say something? Because I saw you came off of mute. Okay, you're good.
I'm just kind of muting people around me
Okay, no problem.
from
Got
time to
that.
time.
Okay, David.
So I heard something in Deirdre's conversation that connected back to Randy's question earlier.
Sounds good.
So why do Black people stay in the Black church? So it's the same as those kids, the kids she talked about who were sent to the Catholic schools, because that was what was going on for them at the time. And I heard a I think it was a video or a class I took a while back, but talked about the this individual who suggested that we are now who we were when. And the when is somewhere between about 8 and 13 years old. Was that whatever was going on in the world at the time? That's what you are now, unless there's some significant emotional kind of event that changes it. So, I mean, my grandmother, who's passed away some years ago, she was born in 1918. Virtually everybody who was born in 1918, once they got into their 60s and 70s, they have the little cups of this and the jars of that, and they is because they lived through the Depression in their formative years.
Right.
So we all are a product of whatever it is going on, and a lot of it is the people who are around us. So because kids are born perfect, they're born ready to conquer the world, and then they get exposed to really messed up adults who've got all kinds of baggage and crap they're dragging around with them, and they open up their bag and they pour it on the kids.
Well, let me add something to this, David, because actually as someone who carried a kid for 10 months, you start communicating with them even like, no, I mean, I can touch on it from a lot of different spiritual perspectives, but there's like the new agers that know that people have regression memories that back to, in the womb. There's like, and I don't want to be too airy fairy because I know you like the money and the concrete, but I'm also wanted to touch the other part too. I know you're a whole human being. It's one of the reasons I asked you to be a special guest. But so there are people who have experiences. So children, I just, because people talk about children like they're perfect beings, and they're not. They're just beings like every other being on the planet, and they come with challenges just like the rest of us, but they just aren't as many because they haven't come to adulthood, to their 20s yet or whatever. But being like born, every baby's different, and you don't know what's informing what they're experiencing, because we don't know that much about babies, although there's more research that's being done, like that babies have their own language. Moms are being taught that babies have their own language about, and it's a baby language. I could actually posted something about that, but I just wanted to, it's important to me to interject these ideas of worldview, because it's a holistic approach. So if you wanted to go ahead, I know I interrupted you, David, I'm sorry. But
no, what it made me think about how, she talked about how the kids recognized that there was something that didn't kind of jive with them. And that's, a lot of the major societal change that goes on around the world, it happens from young people, that they go, well, the other generation did that thing and we want to do something else.
Well,
And,
it's I'm glad you're saying this about the generations, because the very next podcast I'm doing is going to be on generations, and I've already started talking to people about being part of that. And Deirdre, we can have a follow-up conversation about that. But the thing about generations is we should expect them to take it to the next level. We should expect them to hate what we did, but we could teach them to be more gracious about how they come at us about it. But we should expect them to go, I can't believe you guys did that. That's ridiculous.
Right.
At the same time, take it to the next level. Take what we've poured into them and just take it to the next level. And there's all these toxic dynamics there instead. Like when I was coming up as a student leader, I was sitting on the Board of Regents, and there was somebody that was on the Board of Regents with me that wasn't welcoming, who should have been. Right. By all circumstances should have been welcoming to me, but they weren't. They never spoke to me once the whole time I was there, and I was there for a year. And the thing is that we should start to deconstruct these things, because there are things that are in the Black community specifically, and the Caribbean community. Like there are ways that we parent that are so toxic. But I want to put a pin in that and come to Karen, because I want you, this is a good place to touch on the maternal mortality rate that you touched on, and then whatever else you'd like to touch on.
Okay. Well, real quick, I just want to, something that Deirdre said about enrolling her kids. I was one of those kids in Baltimore City. I was the only white girl in my grade by the time I got to 5th grade, because all the other white kids were then going off to private schools and parochial schools. And so that was how I grew up. And you talk about how worldview affects how you see things. I knew racism as discrimination I didn't see it as systemic, and even all the way through high school. And it wasn't until these last couple years that I'm like, oh, well, maybe there's something to the systemic thing, because what I surrounded myself with was a multicultural group. I can't say it was even by choice. It's what I grew up with. It's what
Sure.
I knew.
Hmm.
And there wasn't racism amongst one another with my friend group, which
Right.
was very diverse.
Hmm.
Um, and then, just a few months back, I had a conversation with a friend of mine from high school, a Black man who's a pastor and a math professor in Baltimore. And he said, your experience and my experience were very different. And he started to share some of that. And I'm like, we went to the same school, we were friends, and
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And that was humbling and eye-opening.
Yeah.
But so to come back to the maternal mortality, and when I heard that statistic, it's over 3 times as high maternal mortality rate. Say that a few times really quickly, for Black to white women.
Yes. Hmm.
And it just, so this whole election thing has been frustrating,
Sure.
um, because up until 2016, I have been a conservative and have voted pro-life and all of that, and I have started to see that as a carrot that has
Yep.
been dangled, um,
That's exactly
and
what it is. Hmm.
and now I'm starting to see that we should be valuing life from womb to tomb.
That's right.
And when I saw that mortality rate, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that we're only looking at one little part of life and saying we value that. And in the meantime, everything else can just fall apart
Yeah.
and whatever, we don't care.
Yes.
So it's helped me to come to terms a little bit better with
Yes.
voting a little bit more to the left.
Or so they call it that.
Or
Yeah.
so they
Mhm.
call it.
Yeah.
But it's shocking. Is it's not just that, it's what are the conditions and what are the things that have brought that to be?
Yes.
Why is it that way?
Right.
And so I don't have the answers to all of that
Sure.
except
Right.
to what I'm reading and learning, and that there are systemic problems and we need solutions.
Well, I found that one of the solutions is that I call this heart work. If you notice, this is not a class. I'm not going through and saying these are the terms that they talked about in the movie and this is what those terms mean and all that kind of stuff. I don't do that. Becky can tell you when she's available, but literally I do go through and make sure, when we're doing like the book study, like when we do a people's history of the United States, we're doing it chapter by chapter because we go in depth into different things that people want to know more about or have questions about. But those things are just platforms for us to launch into the conversations that we bring to the conversation. So like about private schools are part of that system because the system is the part that's is invisible. In the 60s, we did really great at identifying hatred as a form of racism, but we didn't say that it was a form of racism. We said that's what racism was. So then everybody took from that great time in our society and said, okay, well, I'm going to deal with how I treat other people. White people feel great if they can stand next to a Black person or a person of color. They feel great about that. I have a Black friend. But it's actually like, do you value them at the same level of your humanity? Do do you fight for them? Is there a question about that police video and what must they have done before that? There's all these other areas that it comes up, but where it's kind of invisible to us because no one's engaging in that place with us. So private schools was what it was every single. Oh, here's a key for you. If you're big on a US history, right, you can literally go from the 1600s to now, and every bit of progress that people of color, and I'm specifically going to say Black people, have made. Because one thing that a lot of people don't know is that when we're talking about racism, there's only two groups: white people and Black people. Because there's only two groups. If you're not white, you're Black. You're a shade of Black,
One drop.
according to racism. they don't care whether you're Chicano or, okay, that's just a language thing that we're going to add to how we oppress you, you know, like they don't care, you know, all these intersections, they don't, racists don't care about that. And that system doesn't care about any of those things, because what happens is it's invisible. That's how it keeps perpetuating itself. When it's rooted out in one area, like education, that's a big place. The workplace, that's a big place. It goes and hides in other areas. Okay. It hides in other areas and it pops its head up in other ways. And I could talk for a long time about that, but I'm not going to talk about that at length right now. So we did the individual approach coming out of the 60s. What we're doing now is the systemic and group dynamic approach. That's what our country's going through right now. And we have the right leadership for that. We had the right leadership for the backlash. If you go through US history, you'll find every bit of progress had backlash that came right afterwards. And that's a very spiritual flow of things, you know. And it's actually, when I talk to people, we're at 7:05 right now, and I do end on time, just to give people a chance to step out if they want to step out, and continue if they want to continue. So we have 25 minutes left in this conversation, the official part of the conversation. But one of the ways that I teach people about change is like how the ocean, and because I grew up in California in the Bay Area, and I went to Santa Cruz a lot and Pacifica a lot and different places, watched the ocean a lot. I noticed that the ocean comes in a little bit and goes out a little bit, and then comes in a little bit more and goes out a little bit more. So it sometimes it's the nature of change, but in US history, I can show you backlash. You know, when black men were given the right to vote, and then they started showing up in the government, you know, as elected officials, because, you know, the thing is that there was never a time that white people were the majority in America, because black people started out outnumbering white people because of the number of slaves that white people had. If you really think about that, every single plantation had more black people on it than it did white people. So how is it that black people don't predominate the population now? Terror, murder. That's how. Mortality rate, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, just mortality rate from COVID, like every single, that saying, if, the white community gets a cold, the black community has the flu, you know, and it's like that. And so when I say white and black, when I'm talking about racism, I'm not trying to like erase anyone. I'm just keeping the discipline of the science of what racism is and how it functions. But if I talk about anything else, those of you who know me, I talk about a lot of ethnicities that I'm aware of, because I had the benefit of going to James Logan High School, and in the 1980s, our school looked like the world. There's this picture from one of our yearbooks that I'm going to post after this conversation, because just in the swath, that this picture that they took out of one of our rallies, you couldn't go, oh, there's like any ethnicity in that picture. It was just the diversity of where we grew up. And we still had things to address even back then that were racial, but we still had diversity because it's in people's hearts. And that's why I do this heart work, because if we do the heart work, my friend Michael once said, if we weed our own gardens, we'll have a beautiful world. And doing this heart work is what's going to impact every single thing else. It's going to ripple out into everything else. Randy, did you want to say something?
No, I had the same reaction about Logan
Yeah.
High School. I grew up out in Clayton, California. It's pretty much all white.
Yeah.
And I went to Berkeley, and it was still pretty much white, and some Asian and some black athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And although my roommate was black. Remember Mr. Davis?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
He was
my
your
roommate in
roommate?
college.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. See the things we don't know about our teachers.
That's how we wound up. That's how we wound up at Logan.
Oh, that's of course.
So I showed up at Logan. I got that job.
Yes.
And I had band camp in the summer. I had some kids come out before school started, and I was doing that. And the first day at school came, and I walked down the hall, and I went, "Oh my God!" I never, first time in my life, I was the minority. There's a lot of brown faces of all shades going down that hallway.
That's right.
And it was funny. After teaching there for 6 years, I moved into administration, and we moved out to Danville, another white place. And I go to the grocery store, and it looked funny. All those white people.
And I'm glad that it got to the point of looking funny to you, because that's the world that we can live in if we, do this heart work. Because the stuff that's in our way is really trauma and hurt that's unresolved. And it looks a lot of different kinds of ways, but that human, because what we were taught, and there's two things that I want to say about this, because we're talking about the church, but we're also talking about racism, is that what we were taught is that, othering, we were taught othering. It's like one of the ways that we were taught to learn. And those who have homeschooled or kind of innovated about delivering education, like one of the things we need to look at is, that differentiation. One thing is not like the other. And then the value judgment that we put on it, because that's one of the ways that human beings distinguish their world. It's like contrast, compare and contrast, but it doesn't have to become the construct of our society. And so it's become the construct of our society. So, we have this hidden thing that we have looking at, and then we have our garden, the weeds in our own garden. Let's really just start there, because there's two leapfrogs that people want to do. They want to go to, what can I do about it? And it's like, how are you qualified to do anything about it when you don't even know what you're doing? Like, what are you addressing? Do you know the system? One of the conversations we had, Becky, was part of it, because we do a lot of visioning in that group, and it's just natural because that's something that human beings do. And we saw the system as like a lot of gears. Many of you might have seen the picture that we put up after those notes of that group meeting. There's like all these gears. You can put sand in the gears, but if you can't visualize how this system works, then your answers are not going to meet the problem. So we're going to jump off of, oh, I like Deirdre. Deirdre and I get along just fine. But, I'm from Jamaica, and she has whatever family background, and we don't know anything about how that's operating in our relationship. And there are places on the planet where people are more open to just having the conversation that's right there to have about race, about class, about all kinds of things. It's called being direct. In the South, it's called being ugly. but we want to get to a place where we're able to sit and hear other people's truth, and to hear the reparation or the repair work that needs to happen. So I want to step into repair work conversations, because let me tell you, I took like 5 pages of notes, and I'm always sharing my notes, but I took 5 pages of notes just about this movie. And this conversation is not about those 5 pages of notes. It's not about the terms, unless you have questions about the terms. It's about this conversation that we're having right now today, because every single person that's spoken this evening, somebody who's going to watch this video is going to be able to see themselves in you. They're going to be able to see themselves and then find their access to this conversation. Because I have close friends, and most of us were taught we don't talk about what 2 subjects?
Religion and politics.
Religion and politics. And then the third conversation that's even deeper that we don't talk about, it doesn't even come up on the radar, we don't talk about money. So if we're not talking about these 3 huge influencers, we're not examining those 3 huge influencers, we're kind of walking around blind, aren't we? Bumping into each other, having these problems in society with each other, because we don't know what we have to say about any of these subjects.
Nadine, I'm going to say something.
Yay.
I wasn't sure if I was going to speak at all this evening. I mentioned to you, one of my good friends invited me to join like your pages months and months ago. And actually, at first, I was very frustrated with this friend at the heat of when everything was going on, because my story is, coming from up north and moving here around 13, 14. I went from a very diverse, so many different types of people, to being a really minority here in this small country town. So my experience changed on both sides, from whites and blacks in the churches and schools. It's, because I was just used to being around all different types of people, and then I was made to, you have to decide who you're going to hang around. So that was very hard for me, and still as an adult has been hard because I didn't move away from this place. So I grew up not wanting to go just to the Black church or just to the, I wanted to go, I really wanted everyone to be together, honestly, you know. And so for me, I just tended to stay away from topics on racism and things. I didn't want to be a token. I just didn't. Like, I am not the spokesperson. Stop looking at me to solve your problems. Just let me be. So when the heat of all this started happening at the early of this year and everybody wanted to talk about it, I was very frustrated because everyone started looking at me like, okay, well, you can solve this for us or talk to us, you know. And I didn't want to talk about it. You know, when the person, you know, Megan, you know, when she asked me to join, I was like, I don't want to talk about it. Leave me alone. I just don't. I'm like, you know, I'm Black and I'm a woman and I'm a Christian. Just leave me alone. So this has actually been, I peep in sometime on some of your conversations, and I think I'm gonna join the book club, but I'm gonna see if discussion. This has actually been kind of healing for me. I really have to say, because I know it's something I need to heal from and talk about and speak my truth, right? But I have a lot of hurt from the white and Black community.
Girl, me too. But go ahead.
just honestly, from the church, from the white community. But I'm like, I want you all to leave me alone, because I'm just going to talk to God, because I can't fool with any of you.
Right.
And so listening to all of you has been it's another step forward in me being able to speak my truth and heal. So I just want to say thank you all. I've really enjoyed listening to you all tonight, and I'm so glad Megan did introduce me to you, Nadine.
I'm so glad too. We'll talk more, Dreama. We'll talk more. Karen,
Nadine,
did you
can
have
I
something?
jump in? I did want to say something.
Yes.
I had to laugh a little bit with something that Dreama said. So my first conversations earlier this year with my friend Julian from back in Baltimore, you know, they were a little rough. And you talk about setting up a space where you can say you know, I'm sure I put my foot in it more times than I can count. But he basically came down and said that, you know, you can't expect the oppressed to tell the oppressors how they need to fix this. And I was like, ouch, okay, I get that. And he says, you need to get the people that look like you together in a stadium and figure out what you're going to do. And again, it's very hard to hear that. And, you know, my logical mind is saying, but yes, how could we solve a problem though without asking the input of those who have been most hurt by it? And so, you know, he kind of came back around. He says, well, since we've run cross country together and we've sweat together, and, you know, I understand you're not expecting me to be the voice of all the people that look like me, then, you know, we can have this conversation. So that was a good hurdle to get past. But, you know, I hear a lot of that same experience in what Dreama says. And it's good to hear. You need to hear it.
It's actually, Karen, when Megan approached me, I actually was very.
Say it again, Dreama. Hold on. We're missing your audio. Go ahead. No, I want you to speak, but I think you were muted or we lost your audio, and I knew what you were saying was important, so we didn't want to lose you. So try unmuting yourself.
Nadine?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. When Megan first approached me, it was tears. We were talking about Voxer when she was trying to get me to listen to one of your books. And I actually said that, Karen said, like, it's not my responsibility, you know, to help you fix this or help you feel better. And I was so angry and so frustrated. So, but we came to healing through that. And she wasn't going to leave me alone, because that's just,
no, that's not
I don't know if any of you interact with Megan Sanders, but she won't leave you alone. And so I did appreciate that, but that's how I felt just mad.
And let me say something about this exhaustion, anger dynamic, because the reality is Black people only live the experience. They don't know the scaffolding of what racism is as a system. So what you're asking most Black people for, when you're asking for us to talk about it, you're asking us to relive the trauma, because that's all we have for most people, is the reliving the trauma, like saying, well, this is what happened, and you're like reliving the trauma and re-injuring yourself, really, which is why that, and then, you know, just the exhaustion of just being Black in America is just, and especially with these things going on. And what everybody said, because one of the things I said when I went to Davis, and when I went to Davis, in the whole city of Davis, there were 400 Black people. In the whole city, there was a high school, a whole college campus, and all of that. And all of that was just 400 Black people. And I used to say, in exasperation, I am not the walking encyclopedia on Black people for white people. And God has a sense of humor, and I'm doing anti-racist facilitation. So, you know, like, it's all great, because the fact is that instead of trying to teach terminology and those kinds of things, I want to have the discipleship conversations, because discipleship is not about, hey, I want you to be a better Christian. Discipleship is about fellowship. It's about people getting together and having a conversation. It's about iron sharpening iron, or steel sharpening steel, because in the Quran it says steel, and in the Bible it says iron. I mean, and some people have never read either book, and they don't have any idea that they say a lot of the same things. But don't let me get started, because the long story short is, there's this idea of a block. Say do you know people who haven't really left their neighborhood in their whole life? Okay. And if you never leave your neighborhood in your whole life, you think your neighborhood is how the rest of the world is. Okay. And all of us have that. Okay. All of us, there's not one of us that don't have that. I don't care how much you've traveled. I don't care what you've seen in your life. You haven't seen everything, and you still are who you are. Okay. And that is the nature of what we're dealing with. We are in a more siloed society. I hope my brothers in the tech field will stop writing algorithms that reinforce, you know, negativity amongst people, and look at neener, what your friend, you know, commented on. You know, I hope that they write algorithms, they fix the algorithm so it actually fosters humanity versus adversity. But there's all these ways that technology has reinforced that, but we need to know that technology is a tool, and the tool is in our hands, and we can use it any way we want. Okay. So we can think about that part, because Antoinette, I'm in that area of, what can we do? What, you know, what are the things we can do? I don't give anyone any ideas about that,
I
because
have I have
I
some
bel
thoughts.
I know you do. And I do believe that the conversations that need to take place in our lives is where we all start, especially if you're new to this conversation. It's so important for us to understand that we all have work to do that we are skipping over. Like, I have therapists. If my therapists aren't seeing a therapist, they can't be my therapist. If people call themselves leaders, and they want, and their stuff in their house, in their relationships aren't straight, then I don't care about their opinion, because they're more interested in somebody else's opinion out there than they are doing the disciplined work of what their life looks like. And I'm not saying that it's got to be perfect. It's just got to be in progress. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. So, like, if my relationships with my friends aren't out loud and in progress, then who am I to go telling other people how to live? And I just stop there. I don't tell people how to live. I just honor the human being that's right in front of me. And that's what I want to encourage other people to do. David, you had a suggestion for people about how they should live?
Well, not necessarily how they should live,
Okay,
but
good.
um, it even goes back to this conversation about the church, or the gathering of folks who call themselves religious, however
Hmm.
you want to describe them. That
Sure.
those institutions often spend way too much time reading about what people did years ago in
Mm.
all kinds of books,
Hmm.
and not near enough time having a conversation with the people in the room about how we want to live today and tomorrow.
Sure.
It's So as opposed to, we ought to do, frankly, because it says it in the Bible, it has to be done, doesn't mean it has to be done that way. So I think they talked about in the movie how some things were taken almost way too literal,
That's the
but
whole problem.
based on that translation. And instead of the people in the room, what is it? What kind of world do we want to have? What do we want to experience together? What, and let's make that happen, as opposed to trying to drag all these books and experiences and all these other things that some of it aren't going to help us get anywhere. They're going to help us stay where we were.
Well,
And I just
it functions differently for different people.
it
Like
does.
there's no prescription.
Yeah, but to go forward, it seems to me like we have to come up with an idea in our head about what we want forward to look like. Because otherwise, even if we get there, we won't know it. It's taking the time to dream, to get in contact with our inner being, but just to think about, so what do we want, instead of the time that we spend complaining, being hurt, being beat down about what we were. What do we want to be? And what steps are we going to take to be that? Who am I going to meet? Who am I going to talk to? What steps am I going to take to be that person, to be that more perfect being, that better society, that better church, that better organization? I don't think groups spend enough time talking about that, because they always revert back to how hurt they all are. We all are. But how do we get better?
Well, here's the thing. And I'm so glad that you made sure that I talked about this, because this is something that we touched on at the beginning of the conversation, but we didn't really unpack. Lament is essential.
Mm-hmm.
And who we are as a society is people who don't want to have the ugly conversations, the hard conversations, or the emotional work. If we could take a pill, and a lot of people want to take a pill, and I have nothing against medications, people got to do what they have to do. But people would rather take a pill than actually do the emotional work that's set in front of them by their own life and their own life choices. So I don't have a problem with people emoting. I don't have a problem with people going through whatever process they need to be going through. That's why I said what I said exactly like I said it. Progress is what I'm talking about. And progress looks very different for a lot of different people. So I'm not going to, as I'm a 50-50 brain, like I am literally 50%. So I've taken so many different tests. I'm 50% artistic and 50% analytical. And the artistic process is, and, Randy knows even more so about this as a, like a serious musician. The process is so very individual. Like every single thing in life, every single thing that human beings engage in has a technical language and a technical construct. Dare I say, a science. But there is also the spiritual aspect of who we are, and our emotional work and all the stuff that is soulish that we do as human beings. And we always need to bring both. Always need to engage both. Always need to bring both. And so when I'm engaging with my friends, we get all kinds of inspiration just from talking with one another. That is humanity at its base. I happen to live in New York after 9/11. I was in New York for 9/11. And one of the things that I saw was a care and concern for the people that are there that I haven't seen at that same degree since, right? But who we are in our heart as human beings are neighbors. We do literally get something out of connecting with another human being. So when it's important for us to connect with another human being, we need to stay grounded in our humanity. But the work that I like to do with people is to help them find that map. Because like now, if I'm triggered, I know why I'm triggered. I'm not just triggered for no reason. But that also gives me an ability to be more reliably not triggered in a conversation, because then I can choose environments, I can choose conversations, I can choose boundaries that allow me to feel safe, me to be responsible for feeling safe, not Deirdre's job to make me feel safe, not your job, David, to make me feel safe, but for me to, as I grow up in maturity, to be able to be safe inside myself. So then Dreama would be able to say to her friend, I'm really exhausted with this whole thing. And you guys asking me, just like she did, you guys asking, like, I'm not here for that. I wish I could be accessible to that, because that's one of the things we said when we started this whole process, is the reason that I can do this work is because I've been waiting 30 years to do it. When this work was first put in front of me as a freshman in college, there was a group called Unlearning Racism. And the only people that were in that group were white people. Black people couldn't even, people of color couldn't sit in there. Only white people were in that group. And they wanted to unlearn what they had learned. But there's also a time for us to sit together. And I believe I waited 30 years for us to be able to sit together. And this is just one of the first conversations in that. So we have 2 minutes left. I want to give people an opportunity to say whatever you want to say to sign off. I'm going to probably continue the video for another 30 minutes. So if people want to hang in and have more to say and talk more, that's great. Anybody who wants to sign off at 7:30 on the nose, because I gave you that end time, I'm happy to have you do that as well, because I don't want to hold anyone hostage. So anyone have anything in closing that they want to say? Well, I'll say this. Go ahead, Deirdre.
Well, I was just gonna say, there are a few things. I'm like you. I typed out 5 pages of notes. I went through each chapter, and I wrote things, and I time stamped it because I want to go back and watch this again. And
Yes.
but I did highlight a few things, and the last thing that I highlighted was my second to last comment, and it was that the church in America is lousy at lamenting. And and it's funny because a lot of people, when you were sharing at the very beginning of this, it was so, I mean, it's so indicative of our trip on the road, because everyone, without really any exception, came to our conversations having hurt, and wanting to get past the hurt. But I've been, I was raised in the church, and what I have seen is there are very few things you can count on consistently in the church. But one of them is hurt. Like, it is just something, because the church is made up of sinful people. And
Of
so,
people. Yeah.
yeah. And so it was really important for us to kind of dig to the root of it. And there are a lot of root issues, but one of them's power, one of them's pride, one of them's greed, and being able to see situations for what they are, because you can't deconstruct, if that's the word you want to use, dismantle. Like, you can't do any of these things until you understand what the root cause is. And so it becomes, a lot of the conversations that we have with people is just kind of say, yes, like we want holistic healing, like we want people to be their best version of themselves, but having some understanding of where the hurt comes from is really, really important as you move forward, because history repeats itself over and over and over again. And how do we raise up another generation to do it better than we did? And having transparency and owning up to our own mistakes. And like, it's just, all of this is so, so important. But especially, there was something that was just talked about, I appreciate David and Dreama, like giving your perspectives and talking about, how hard this walk is, and how to consistently have these conversations over and over and over. I can only imagine how draining they are. And I've been in places where I've been those people that have said to you, please tell me, please teach me, please, and not even recognizing that I could be, causing you to relive trauma, or like, and like, I'm just unaware of all of that whatsoever. And so to be able to continuously have these conversations is so incredibly important. But I remember one conversation on the road that changed everything for me. And it was it was a Black woman in California, and she just left the church. She completely walked away from the church, and really didn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. And she just looked at me, and she just said to me very boldly and bluntly, she said, it doesn't really matter what I think or what I have to say, because the people that need to know the truth, they won't even listen to me, because they don't like me because of the color of my skin. And she's like, they won't listen to what I have to say. And she said, that's why people like you are important, because they will listen to you. And she's like, do you know how frustrating that is and infuriating? And I wept. Like, I left and we went back to the RV and I just wept because I had no clue. Like, there was so much brokenness. And I look back on church experiences and I said, this is why the conversation is important, because I know people in my own life where that was very relevant. That nothing that this woman said, they would not listen to it. They would not validate her experiences. They would come up with some type of excuse for how she, it was her fault that these things happen. And like, as she was saying all these things to me, I'm getting goosebumps now. Like, I was like, this is why the conversation is important. This is why we have to like systemic racism. It does exist. It doesn't matter how many people in my own family say it doesn't. It does. And like, they won't listen to anyone who says that they have experienced it. And so like, I don't know if I can articulate and underscore that anymore, but like, it is just, it's so, so important. And I'm really thankful to be a part of this conversation too, because, I feel like I'm being sharpened and I'm being educated and I'm being equipped, whether it's with Be the Change Youth Initiative or in my own personal interactions, to do what I feel like the Lord is calling our family to do when it comes
That's
to
awesome.
restoration.
Yeah, thank you, Deirdre. That's awesome. So anybody else? I'm going to have the last word, but I want to give other people a chance. We're past 7:30. I saw some people jump off and I'm glad that they did. Um, anyone?
Well, specifically speaking about the movie itself and
Mm-hmm.
how I really like the fact that it started off with with what I believe to be one of the fundamental challenges with a lot of things in this country is that they were based on this crank science called race.
Yes,
They were based on a myth in the first place,
that's
and
right.
everything that came after it was just kind of strange. And but I also think it's important, because just become my nature, I guess, that that the church and every other institution think not just converse and talk about this, but do something different.
Yes.
And the people who the people who feel, not everybody's going to get it, not everybody's going to be interested, and I'm okay with them, being the way that they are. I mean, it's a free country. People can feel and think however they want to think. But those that actually believe that this should be different should be doing more about it, not just saying more things about it. And the doing is, having these conversations with each other, having conversations with folks sometimes that don't want to hear it, taking the opportunity to make a contribution into some organization or some activity that is, it's doing things. It's kind of working it out, like these working out your soul salvation, kind of working it out. Because the only way, no, one of the ways
Okay.
that all of these things are going to change is people taking action that is supportive of the words that they've uttered.
Well, that's a perfect segue, David, because in our group, in the anti-racism education group, there is a topic tag, excuse me, a topic tag that's called actions. And there's one resource that has a whole list of organizations. There, just click on the actions topic tag and you'll have all kinds of resources that you can choose from. And it's not even about, oh, I need to do this particular action, because Becky can tell you, I don't tell people what to do. I just lay a whole buffet out there. And sometimes people will be inspired. Like, there was this one dude who's out here doing like what do they call that, sandblasting, or like heart, was that washing, that when they're washing like dirt off of buildings and stuff. He
Power
was
washing.
power washing, thank you, David. Power washing, graffiti, hateful graffiti off of places. My action is having this group, like some, and the Facebook group and these discussions, so I can focus my energy and I'm having the conversations and I'm not constantly engaging people who are like, well, racism isn't real. Well, race isn't real, but racism is.
Yes.
And there's two things I want to leave us with, because I am going to end close to the time, is that and I'll just basically stop recording and then we can have our post conversation. But human beings need two things. And I know a lot of people are going to say love, but love is how we're created. Love is who we are. Okay. Love is who we are. But outside of the love that we are, because we're a reflection, I'm talking about inside of my construct. I'm talking from my worldview now. And one of the things I say to the group is I don't try to represent other people's points of view. I can only represent my own. So if there's something that needs to be added from another point of view, I'm always happy to have somebody share that as well. But I believe that we are love because we're made in the image of God and God is love. But there's two things that human beings need. We need humility and stamina. Those are two things that we need to stamina. We need to like increase our emotional stamina, our physical stamina, our stamina in general, our stamina to listen to another person, you know, and then humility, where I know a lot. I have 30 years of experience. I have books upon books upon books. Somebody stole my whole library of books to start a school, but the fact is that we still need to listen in humility because we don't know the adventure that other human being that we're talking to and engaging are. And there's this last thing. Deirdre and I have our friends and sisters, and so like there's a chemistry that happens when it's Deirdre and Nadine talking versus when there's David and Nadine talking, or Randy and Nadine talking. But then there's the chemistry of this group talking. Okay. And so what we want to understand is there's no automatic way things need to be done. Okay. There is science to everything, and everybody's journey is their own journey. But when it comes to racism, if we are not actively engaging in whatever way that we can, and one of the ways we can engage is to rest, okay, is to take care of ourselves.
Mm.
Because when you're putting your own mask on first, then you're doing a good service and ready to do a good service to other people, right? So one of the things we can do is rest, but educate ourselves, all of the things. So what are some things that you do that keeps you sharp in this particular conversation about racism, systemic racism, that kind of thing? Because this is not just for our benefit, it's for other people's benefit as well. Becky, thanks for joining by video, and I'm going to ask you to say a couple words too. But what are some things that you already do that keeps you somewhat sharp in this conversation? Everybody that's on this call right now is sharp in this conversation. So what are some things that you think that you do that might keep you sharp in the conversation? Becky, do you want to jump in here?
Um, I think one of the things that I do is, as conversations are happening around me,
Mm-hmm.
conversations that are happening at work and things like that, I'm listening to what people are saying. I'm listening to how they're reacting to things, and I'm listening and aware of how I'm reacting to things. Like somebody said something the other day, and actually somebody said something today, and I found myself just kind of doing that, a little bit of laughter. And then afterwards I thought, I shouldn't have even been laughing. That was totally inappropriate. Why was I laughing at that? And um, and even I think that self-awareness. I don't even know if I'm
No, you're
getting my
right.
point across, but
Yes.
the self-awareness piece, I think, is it's been very valuable for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-awareness, because, the ancient knowledge is know thyself. That's the highest form of knowledge, is to know thyself. Some people say, oh, but you should know God. I said, yeah. And how I get to know God is because I'm having this engaging conversation with myself and with God and going, okay, God, where am I with you? Because the thing is that a lot of people need history, and not a lot of people need frames in order to jump off of. Every single human being does. And David, I know that your frame is the future.
Mhm.
You know, Some people's frame is history, but we need everyone in the conversation in order to get, because we have the solutions as a collective body. We have the solutions that we need. It's just that we need to put people in a position to unleash their best work. Anything else for anyone on this topic before I officially close out and stop recording, and then we can just talk to each other like normal human beings? Karen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sure. You
Mm-hmm.
asked how we keep ourselves sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least right now, I'm trying to learn. If we don't understand how the machine works, then how can we even think about dismantling it? How can we try to talk to others about dismantling it?
Mm-hmm.
And so it has taken, I don't know how many months now that I've been eavesdropping on your group, or just lurking and trying to learn before I decided to take part in the conversation.
That's right.
Because I just, I want to be prepared for that, and not just go in blindly, which is, I'll parallel that to what a lot of new believers do. They have this newfound faith and excitement and love for Jesus Christ, and they're gonna share them, and they're gonna, and I think the damage that new believers can do sometimes is
Right.
is yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
great to have the passion and enthusiasm, but a little discipline, a
Mhm.
little understanding, a
Yeah.
little bit of grace
Hmm.
are all important things. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to work there and get there.
Yeah. And the thing is that I tell people all the time that small moves like build mountains. That's how anthills get built. Ants, but I'm not going to get off into ants right now, but they're amazing creatures. Randy, did you have something you wanted to say before we sign off?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so glad you came. Thank you. Stay on with us. Deirdre,
Good.
Becky.
I just wanted to add the flip side
Mm-hmm.
to the self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
is also being aware of how things I'm saying and doing are being interpreted and accepted by other people.
Yes. Yeah. So the thing is, the work that we do in the group on Wednesday nights, it's a really deep, like, it will make you present at a level that most people are terrified to be in their life. I'll just be honest with you. But it's not some big flashbang kind of process. It's just like what we did today, but we do it in a very more slowed down way. So yeah, and it's not recorded. It's never going to be recorded. And people can get their whole life out of it. A lot of people have been talking about the fact that they are. And that's what I want to leave the world. I want to leave the world better than I found it. People relating to each other better than I found them. And love at the center of it. And love looks like a lot of different things. It looks like correction. It looks like nurturing. It looks like a whole lot of things. But what the fundamental thing of it is safety. Every single human wants to feel secure at whatever age we are. And if we take care of each other in that way, we'll be doing what we need to be doing to create the society that we have in our hearts, and we have in our minds, and we have in our mind's eye. We all have this better society, that neighborly experience I had after 9/11 in New York City, of all places. So we have that in our hearts. We just need to create spaces for that to be unleashed. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to this recording. I hope you get your life out of it. I look forward to seeing your comments and the ongoing discussion and the ways that it's going to ripple out into your life and the people's lives that you touch. Thank you for being a whole human being and working towards whatever you need to work towards to have that be manifested. And don't forget, lament is just as important as joy. It's essential. So take the time to lament, take the time to grieve, do the whole process. Don't skip over any of it, because if you skip over it, sometimes it'll come and raise its head at a time that's unfortunate for you. So don't skip over the work. It's going to be there regardless of whether you do it or not. So thanks for listening. NadineBentRussell.net is going to launch this weekend. That's where you can catch all the information the resources that I share with people. And you can follow us on social media. Join us on Facebook with Anti-Racism Education. Join the conversation, lurk, just jump in where you fit in. Thanks for listening, and good night.